I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Abhishek Sharma is a managing partner and assists clients on topics related to price and contract benchmarking, strategic engagement reviews, and sourcing cost rationalization. Achint Arora is a partner and assists clients on topics related to price, solution, and contract benchmarking. Pratik Gupta is a vice president and assists clients on topics related to solution design and review, pricing and contract assessment, cost optimization, and services benchmarking in IT applications and digital services. Vinamra Shukla is a practice director and assists clients on topics related to prices benchmarking, solution review, and contract assessment for IT infrastructure services. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Abhishek.
Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. A warm welcome to all the participants in today's session. We are right now in the middle of the calendar year 2024, and it's been an interesting ride so far. I recall that we'd mentioned in our January webinar that uncertainty is going to be the one common theme we come across this year, and it has shown through in the form of how some of the recent results from service providers have come through, some of the future guidance which has been given. So for today's agenda, we're going to cover three elements which will all focus on that one thing top of mind. What really are the winning pricing and solution sizing approaches? The three main areas or agenda items that we're going to be covering today. We'll start off with the selection criteria that we've seen enterprise clients prioritize in recent technology sourcing deals, because that really forms the basis driving a lot of those wins. Then we'll get into a bit of a discussion, very fact-based, example-based price and solution sizing themes, which seem to be impacting win rates the most. We'll top it off by some pitfalls that both enterprises and providers should avoid and be mindful of. And then we're sure to keep some time for questions, that some of which we've already received. Thanks to folks who sent them in advance, and through the session, do feel free to ask them via the Q&A tab, right? So with this context, as we move to the next page, let's share a little bit of positive outlook, which seems to be coming in the medium term horizon. So like I said, there's been some mixed bag results in the past few weeks, but overall we do expect some recovery in the first few months of 2025, right? So still some months down below, but not so far away that we can't start to see a little bit of glimmer. What do you say, Achint? Is it more of a low base effect combined with kind of latent demand? What seems to be driving the light at the end of the tunnel, if I may use the term?
Okay, so thanks, Abhishek. I hope you're able to hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you think about the current lot of recovery that we are seeing in the market, a lot is to do with the ramp up of managed services deals. Of course, one may question that managed services deals traditionally, the way we are seeing vendor consolidation mandate, are they more related to this cost saving, and that should effectively make things go down. Many of the large deals that were signed back in 2023, I think a lot of those have scaled up, so that's adding to the revenue. So there is a whole base effect that coming into picture, and while a lot of discretionary spend, it continues to be a drag. We know for a fact that buyers are releasing their hold a bit on their wallet, right? Of course, they're not making any big capital investment, big commitment, but they are doing it in small pieces, right? So some of the consulting spend is coming back. We are again seeing more strategy consulting oriented work coming back, right? And once that is done, then there is a downstream implementation work, and we can already see firms which are pivoting towards generative AI, those kind of mandates coming in. So I think a mix of managed services plus some effect of discretionary spend picking up a bit. Not a lot, but a bit, for sure.
Sure. Thanks, Ajay. Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to be a few months, next few months to really watch out for. Now with growth eventually coming through, a variety of levers, as you mentioned, a mix of them at some point. Let's discuss what clients are likely to look for while selecting providers to work with, because that's often a pretty important question that gets asked. So if we move to the next page. Ajay, do you want to cover a few of these, and then I'm best placed to cover 4 and 5.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, right. So if you think about, the pricing and contracting as a lever, all the buyers typically think of if I am getting the right deal. And that's what the financial objectives are. It's just not about, savings, it's also about meeting other metrics, right? Then the second one can be around the solution design, delivery model. Am I getting the right organization structure in place? Am I getting the right governance in place? And then will my operating model transform? Drive the right kind of behavior from the service providers. So that's another criteria when they're evaluating the solution design. Is it the right size? Right? That's a very critical element because that can clearly influence the commercial, which is element one. And then the third one is service provider capability. I think one of the things that we have realized over the past is that as providers bring in a lot of case studies, the question becomes: are they bringing in relevant case studies? Are they bringing in relevant references at all or not? And certainly, that can clearly pivot you towards success or failures. So these are the three major areas where we see, critical criteria that are used by the client for evaluation. And then, there are others as well, which you may want to cover, Abhishek.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've spoken about is pretty concrete. People generally go into a lot of detail. We've seen a lot of scrutiny on different kinds of capabilities, right? Gone are the days when just your standard set of 10, 12 case examples and others might be sufficient. I think there's a lot of scrutiny which is happening in these. This, one of the factors which often tends to get ignored in the hullabaloo of selection processes is a lot of that implicit kind of factor, which is the strategic alignment. Are the objectives of both parties aligned, or do they run counter to each other? So there's no real documentation which falls into this, or something which is very mathematical. Often we'll find, what's the kind of vibe or feel which stakeholders on the client side get when they talk to folks on the other side. This could be things like perceived flexibility, how they're responding to simple asks for more detail. Are they being transparent? Are they being open? Are they being in the best interest or not? So this is something which you've seen come up quite often, as a key decision criteria, even after all the mathematics is done. The final piece is, of course, the overall risk of transition, right? Moving work from internal teams or an incumbent, how can it be managed? And we have seen instances where even after a lot of analysis, the main decision was hinged on the fact so as to choose the path of least risk when it came to transitioning work. So again, there's all of these elements, a lot of these concrete mathematical analysis which come into play, but oftentimes some of these strategic broader elements, which are sometimes more implicit, can really turn the tables. Prateek, having spoken about these at a conceptual level, right? I know that we have some information on how some of these play out in relative importance as part of application outsourcing deals. So on the next page, perhaps you can add some color to that.
Sure, Abhishek. And thanks for giving an overview of the critical criteria that are being observed in IT outsourcing. Now, in order to assess the ranking of these factors, what we did was we assessed all the application outsourcing contracts that we have in our database since 2021 onwards. And just to highlight, the ranking is the factor of two things. One is the frequency of occurrence of these factors and deals, and second is the weightages that are being associated with these factors in various opportunities. Now, what we observe is a clear-cut change in the ranking over the past few years. So, for example, in contemporary deals, we are seeing more weightages associated with pricing, so much so that it almost always is occupying the topmost criteria in most of the locations, except Middle East. And the reason possibly is because of the prevalent uncertainty the clients aim for more cost optimization, and that's why they're giving more weightage to price competitiveness. For Middle East, however, the view is slightly different. It's the solution design and delivery model that occupies the topmost spot. Nonetheless, the pricing is not important over there. It's just that the weightages for solution design is slightly higher. Now, we also see decent weightages being given on service provider capability, and as Achin pointed out, what types of references the bidders are bringing in, what types of case studies are they highlighting, how they are showcasing themselves as strategic partner rather than just another managed service provider. So this is becoming very important. Would also like to highlight that the prevalent uncertainty is also leading enterprise to give more emphasis on the transition solution. The objective most often is to essentially minimize the risk associated with switching of vendor. So, while the ranking of transition solution, it has remained unchanged. It's just that the associated weightages have gone up significantly. Now let's also hear from our cybersecurity SME, Vinam Shukla, on his views on the ranking in cybersecurity space. If we go to the next page, Vinam.
Sure. Thank you, Pratik. If we look at the cybersecurity, the trend is similar to application outsourcing. Largely, we see similar vendor selection criteria for cyber managed services. And I think one of the consistent themes is that we have seen pricing and contracting ranking going up, given the enterprises they are reeling under cost and margin pressure and looking for cost optimization ways. And when we say pricing and contracting, it doesn't only cost competitiveness or price competitiveness, but it is also about the right commercial models, the robust terms and condition, what type of pricing model you are bringing on the table, right? Is it OpEx-based pricing, that can go along with the client expectations? And I think clearly in cybersecurity for the North America and APAC market, pricing and contracting is the #1 criteria in 2023 and 2024 compared to previous year 2021 and 2022, where it was #2 criteria. However, in Europe and Middle East market, the weightage of pricing and contracting has increased in terms of percentage, but the criteria around the solution design, delivery model still take precedence over the pricing. I think we believe vendor capability is also another important criteria as talked about by Achin, Pratik, that helps in evaluating the past experiences, the differences, the case studies, and the overall capability in terms of people strength or certification and all. And transition also becomes important criteria to minimize the risk, retaining the knowledge KT, compliance, another important criteria to ensure the adherence to the regional factors and all. And in fact, compliance, what we understand, has become hygiene to get down selected in the initial rounds. So yeah, I think that's a summary about the different vendor selection criteria that we within the cybersecurity. With that, let me ask Abhishek for a very quick poll to understand from our audience the top factor in the service provider consolidation mandates.
Yeah. Thanks, Pratik and Vinamra. We've talked about a couple of functional areas, but when we look at it from a different lens, which factor do the participants see as the most important in service provider consolidation mandates? Where there's from a large scale suppliers to get to a final few, which are the ones? So some interesting results seem to be coming up. Okay. Got it. I mean, it's interesting that, we have been seeing some, a lot of mandates, for service provider consolidation through 2023. And it just, the moment it seems that it's going down, we see 2 or 3 more, right, coming our way. It's one of those things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Abhishek, again, I do see the polls, I do see pricing and contracting taking the cake, followed by solution design and delivery, transformation. Again, different features, different people rating differently. Again, I'm not surprised by the poll at all, but also, I have perspective around it. While pricing and
Absolutely.
contracting certainly becomes the top mandate, because whenever we talk about vendor consolidation, people talk about, that they want to save costs, and that's why it's becoming top. We also see that a lot of vendor consolidations are to reduce complexity, to manage, and 80 suppliers, 90 suppliers. No one wants to do it in a time like this, right? Of course, we can always think about supply diversification in 2021 as an anti to this, because that is when people were having more for more, but not, right now we are having a situation of more for less. A lot of vendor
Yeah.
consolidation mandates can also be about strategic initiative. I think one perspective that I like to share here is that why pricing and contracting, in my opinion, is at the top right now, even though some of the deals may not be relevant to that. I mean, we do not see all deals being lost because of pricing and contracting. I think it's much easier for buyers to give that as a feedback, that you lost because of pricing and contracting, right? Because of your fees or whatever, right? In spite of the fact, because that's easier. That's easiest
Yeah.
reason to give to any service provider. And then basically, stay off of any further justification of why a provider lost. I think it's imperative is also on the service providers to get feedback from their buyers whenever they are not able to make it to the final four, or let's say the last two, or win the deal. That is pricing the right reason, because often we have realized that's not the right reason, right? That may not
Yeah.
be the only reason. There may be other things underplaying that decision. So
Correct.
that's how I see things.
Yeah. And I think that we had a few pointers on the next page also. Where we presented our view
Yeah.
on each of these. And interestingly, it's not very different. So Dilipan, if we move to the next page. Yeah.
Yeah, the top three elements remain the same, and not,
Correct.
we are not denying that pricing and contracting do not make any difference. It's just like it's not the only reason that can result in an elimination or deselection. Long term, when we have analyzed deals over the years, even the last 1 year or so, what we have realized is that solution and delivery model certainly top the chart, as we have seen so many times, right? That is the clear differentiator between firm that are number one and number two in a deal that has 4 or 5 or 6 different providers bidding for a piece of work, and then between the number three and number four. So often we have seen that the scoring between the one and the two is narrow, but they are much wider compared to their third and the fourth counterpart, right? That's what we are seeing from a solution and delivery standpoint. Then also transformation commitments, what kind of investments are being done? Is there any investment washing that is taking place? Because a lot of time providers may simply bundle their volume related commitments into their broader innovation or investment theme, and then say that there's a lot of money that we are investing into the relationship, but actually they're not, right? They're anyway mandatorily contracted by it, which a lot of buyers say that that's like funny money that the providers are talking about, which actually is not there, but they're still putting it out. And that actually can impact the whole scoring for them, because the buyers do not see that as a favorable thing, any kind of investment washing taking place. So that's where we are seeing the market. Of course, pricing and contracting is a strong third as business cases impacted by it. Unless a provider is significantly breaching the threshold, we do see that providers who are in a similar ballpark may end up getting rated very similarly if they are within a plus minus 5, 10, 15% range, right? Especially for the transformation engagements.
Absolutely. So there's actually another angle, right? We've talked about vendor consolidation deals now. Another flavor that we're seeing a lot this year is the GCC focused or kind of
Absolutely, yeah.
and operate transfer deals. So let's move to the next page and have a bit of a chat on that. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah,
Ajay, go ahead first and then I'll add.
yeah. Okay, so last page, we talked high level on solution transformation pricing. Now on this page, we are delving down deeper into how you need to treat these areas very differently. Your GCC led deal, which is to develop a global capability center for an organization, is not same as a sourcing deal. If a provider applies the same kind of length to that deal, to a GCC deal, they are set up for loss, right? And for a lack of a better word. So again, Abhishek, we have seen the buyer expectations to be clearly different in a sourcing versus BOT construct, right? And even the kind of stakeholders who may be involved in the decision making, the level of scrutiny. Based on your experience, what are the critical success factors for winning one deal versus the other?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, the difference is sometimes so stark. And you know, sometimes I do get surprised why in certain situations some providers tend to miss it. But let me talk about the top three. See, one, clearly, there's a lot of focus on advisory capabilities, especially for BOT deals, because you know the initial build phase, there's a lot of decision making. It's not just taking over a service, it's building up something, building up of an asset, right? And then going through a lot of change to finally hand it back over, or having an option to hand it back over. So that's why there's a lot of focus on, you know, what the broader advisory capabilities that could come into play. And this could mean location evaluation, site selection, what they can do for taxation purposes, multiple. I'm just using very few examples, right?
Yeah.
The second element is a lot of focus on talent practices, right? And truly building a culture in the organization. So we see clients wanting to understand, you know, not just simple hiring channels or where they hire from, or how they'll train, but also, you know, how they'll build up the capabilities, you know, for talent to be developed, you know, extensively. And I think the third is to, you know, how they can show flexibility in multiple commercial models, because depending on the phase, build, operate versus transfer, the commercial models could be very, very different, and how they will hand over back the ownership. So they look for a lot of commercial flexibility, a lot of openness to explore different models, as opposed to perhaps in a classical outsourcing where it's more focused on each of these points. If I take one by one, more on execution, maybe less on advisory, more on kind of, you know, just, hey, you know, you can get the right talent, deliver the work good enough. You know, they're not bothered about how the talent culture is built per se, right? And then finally, it's unlikely that a standard outsourcing contract will have multiple commercial models within it,
Yeah.
right? Maximum, it's a couple. So some very, very clear differences. And final point, providers who have understood and focused on these, overall we've seen them, you know, faring much better, and being on top of the curve in such
Yeah.
pursuits.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we pretty much covered the first section where we talked about different kinds of criteria, what's important to clients in specific scenarios. Let's move on to the second section, where we'll talk about price and solution sizing themes, some examples. So Achin, over to you to kick it off.
Okay. Thanks, Abhishek. Uh, if we are just still continuing from the previous slide, right? And some of the themes that we talked about earlier, we talked about it. If you go on to the next page, number, while it's obvious, you know, why do you think the component mentioned on this page can make a worthwhile difference to a provider's chance to win a bid?
Yeah, sure. I think if you look at the four different key components, right? Price competitiveness, smart commercial structuring, solution and sizing sharpness, and intimate stakeholder understanding, right? See, all these factors listed on this page are interlinked to each other. And it is obvious, but no harm in reiterating that price competitiveness, solution and commercial structuring are linked to what the buyer needs. Now, I think in terms of precedence, providers should think of price competitiveness as a deselection criteria rather than a selection one. And why do I say this? Because in a competitive deal situation, if providers within the reasonable threshold of the buyer's business case, the buyers do end up rating them equally, right? With a clear precedence to the sharpness in the solution sizing or the restructuring. And I think this also at times help the CIOs to look good in front of their counterparts, and it can go a very long way in securing the large part of the sourcing portfolio. And I think one of the other things to look out is understanding the client expectations truly and the expected deal outcomes, and which can be the IT outcome or the business outcome. I think with that, let me ask Prateek to share some examples around price competitiveness.
Yeah, it's actually going to be me on the
Yeah,
next.
yeah.
Yeah, so this is this is an example, right, where it appears totally obvious, but you know, interesting how in situations a simple mark to market comparison can help improve RFP stage down selection rates considerably, right? So this is of a mid-tier service provider. You know, on the right hand side, if you see, they leverage market information on pricing pretty smartly to ensure that their rates hover around or lower than market median, right? Whereas another competitor stuck to their originally high rates, and was practically deselected at the RFP stage, because generally, in some situations where it's, either more of either staff augmentation or, not a lot of differentiation is possible, or none of the parties have a lot of institutional experience which they can, showcase to justify a higher price. Price does become important. Yes, price is not everything, but especially in certain situations where the client is explicit about wanting to add more providers to get higher competitiveness in their portfolio, it does become super important. So again, it's not always that a high degree of complex thinking is required to enable, success, or at least, partial successes in moving to the next stage, of an RFX scenario. Something as simple as, getting the right intelligence to put in the right rates is important. Pratik, we've also talked about another simple lever, right? Around, even things like location choices. Do you want to talk through that on the next page?
Yeah, sure, Abhishek. So we are seeing more and more instances of few providers leveraging India's tier 2 cities. So by tier 2 cities, I essentially mean the low cost locations such as Kochi, Indore, Nagpur, Coimbatore, Lucknow, etc. Now, while this concept of leveraging tier 2 cities in the delivery team mix has been there since quite some time now, what has changed is that earlier the deployment was more of hybrid case, right? So the providers would have bulk of the team in tier 1, and some of the operational monitoring related stuff would be catered from tier 2 location. And that has changed of late. So in contemporary deals, we are seeing more and more instances of tier 2 cities being used entirely for the delivery. In one of the recent proposals wherein we were involved as an external benchmarker for a European financial services organization, one of the Indian heritage providers had proposed Kochi, which is essentially a tier 2 location. And this led to a hyper competitive pricing, landing them a favorable slot in the selection process. Now, key point to note is that this strategy is beneficial for both service providers as well as enterprises. While service providers are able to enhance their margins, the cost is of course lower. The pricing, there's hardly any difference between tier 1 and tier 2, which is why margin is something that higher margin is something which service providers enjoy. On the other hand, enterprises are also able to extract slightly lower pricing compared to what they would have got in case of a tier 1 city. What we also see at times is that enterprise do raise concerns around scalability that the tier 2 locations can offer, which is why we see leverage of tier 2 cities in majorly cost conscious or mid-sized RFPs, not in very large ones. Let's see what some of the other emerging themes are on the solution sizing front. And on that note, let's quickly jump on to everyone's favorite topic nowadays, generative AI. Now, generative AI has been there. Generative AI has been the hottest topic for most of us since past few quarters, and rightly so, because it has created hype for disruption, maximum hype for disruption in the tech market since the cloud, right? So one of the things that is closely associated with generative AI is productivity. We do have our point of view, but we would like to understand from you as to what do you think is the incremental impact that generative AI is causing in application maintenance and support opportunities. Again, I would like to emphasize that we want to understand the incremental impact, not the overall productivity in AMS deals.
Okay, interesting numbers coming up. We'll just maybe give it.
So
okay.
12 to 15%
like
is what is
normal valuation curve, right? If we look at it at a 90-degree angle.
Like 12 to
The
15%
second and the third
is
one had a good race. The items that are ranked second and third. Yeah.
seems so. And this is the incremental productivity and not the perceived one. Actually, what is being observed in the contract is what we were looking for. Again, Achin, what's your take on the whole result?
Okay. I'll go to the next page and I'll use that as a commentary to the previous one, right? I think our audience got right when they talked about 12 to 15%. I think that's got the highest numbers in terms of poll. In our experience, what we are seeing today as part of contracted, and I'm saying contracted productivity, not talked about, not wishful, not hopeful productivity. I'm talking about contracted productivity. That's where we are seeing, because of just generative AI, we are looking at 7 to 15% as a range in a 3 to 5 year contract, right? What you see as 25 to 30%, 35% is a mix of standard and next gen levers. And we are showcasing this slide as a continuum, right? Because your productivity often is a function of where you are starting from. It's not a function of what you are just wanting to propose in a deal. Of course, that's always can be a possibility. We want to clearly articulate and say that someone may come and say, you know what, we have heard provider XYZ saying, I got proposing a 60% productivity in a contract. But you are saying inclusive of Gen AI, we are only looking at 30 to 40% potential. How is that possible? Well, that audience we would like to highlight. That's the starting point, again, makes a difference. What is standard today? And today, we are not talking about yesterday. Yesterday, integrated automation suite was a standard. Today, that's already implemented for many of the mature buyers, right? I mean, we don't see any provider going back and again saying, oh, we will do automation for you, right? That's a 2017 to 2022 story. The relevant story today is a mix of deterministic machine learning algorithms, low-code solution with an already achieved optimized shoring, process maturity, service management. That's what's standard today. The gold plate over that is generative AI. And what we are seeing as a continuum reflects the buyer who did managed services between 2013 to 2016, adopted integration automation suite between 2017 to 2022. And now we are in a stage where they're already scaling up their machine learning solution, piloting their generative AI, and intend to kind of scale that up. We want to also kind of upfront say that this 7 to 15% figure that we are talking about, this is still, I would say, in the journey of technology early days, right? This is where we are seeing the current contracted productivity. We have this conviction that as this technology scales up, as we see more number of successful use cases, we can expect the productivity figures to go up slightly. Right? Again, what that range would be is only a function of how we see contract evolving and how we see the next 6 months shaping up. And of course, when we do a webinar, then we'll also talk about what the relevant latest figures. But that's where we are today. Back to you, Prateek.
Thanks, Sachin. We can jump on to the next slide, talk about the next emerging theme. So it's a rather interesting one. So what we are also seeing is more and more instances of global providers essentially leveraging market benchmarks, external benchmarks, to align their pricing solution so as to keep the deal sole sourced and avoid any chance of enterprise releasing an RFP. So enterprises also understand that there would be complexity, timeline, and cost associated with the RFP process. And they also prefer to onboard a vendor, preferably someone who is an incumbent in some other area. They typically avoid conducting an RFP round, provided that they get an assurance that the proposed pricing aligns with the market norm. That's where third-party validation via external benchmarking serve the purpose. And there are multiple examples. Very recently, Everest Group was engaged by a leading global provider, which was bidding for a SAP S/4HANA greenfield implementation opportunity for a European client. So objective was to essentially assess the fixed fee. So fixed fee, as you would understand, has both would include the assessment of both pricing as well as the solution, the number of FTs involved, the implementation timeline, resource parameters, shoring mix, etc. So in order to do this assessment, we used our proprietary SAP S/4HANA FT sizing and pricing tool, and presented our findings. The vendor also aligned their pricing and filled the gaps, and eventually went on to secure the bid. So definitely, proactive benchmarking is one of the popular strategies being adopted by some of the large providers. That's an emerging theme as well. So, Vinam, can you help us with the examples on cybersecurity side as well? What major themes are emerging on that space?
Yeah, I think we can move to next slide. All right. I think in cybersecurity deals, we are also seeing providers banking upon the solution parameters to differentiate and make it very competitive, right? One of the examples where one of the large service provider, they reach out to us to understand the pricing and the solutioning parameters, especially the team size, the pyramid structure. And the premise was that the provider was bidding for the RFP where the enterprise was sourcing managed security services for the first time, and they were looking for the cost optimization and the centralized delivery. And we assisted the provider in terms of the RU pricing, the team sizing, the staffing, which eventually helped them in validating with the current team size with which the enterprise was operating. And also that helped in overall optimizing the team size by 12 to 15%. We also provided the effort ratios considering the scope of activity, which eventually help in overall deal modeling over the complete 5-year term, and it put the provider at a very competitive edge over the peers. With that, I think let's look at the other interesting examples on the cloud managed services side. Can we move to the next page? Right. So another interesting example related to cloud managed services. And so the premise was the service provider was bidding for the cloud managed services RFP, which was released by a large BFSI customer. And the scope was related to the mix of platform services, infrastructure services, and the database services such as Oracle, SQL. And in the current setup, the incumbent was basically charging on the basis of RUs, right? For instance, that was also considering the partially active services which were on and off during the entire month, right? And this turned out to be the major pain point for the client. So the prime competitor, what we understand, it played out very smartly. It proposed the percentage spend model, which was contingent on the consumption of the cloud services basis, the how much the time the services was uptime. In fact, it went further and proposed the fee basis the complexity of the services. So it classified into the low complex, medium complex, and high complex, which further optimized the fees, and they were able to position the savings of around 15%. And it made a very strong business case. So let me also ask Abhishek to share more light and talk about some other tactics which can play out well in the other deals.
Sure, Vinamra, and this example which you just shared is testament to how sometimes a more simple model can really work wonders, and display more value to the client. If you move to the next page, and Achint, I think what we'll do is we'll speed up because we also want to take a few questions at the end. This was a pretty large deal with multiple providers in the bidding mix. I think the one which took the most effort here to understand what the client stakeholder was looking for, right? And the expectations were way above the normal incumbent operating model.
Yeah.
Incremental could not work, that they walked away with the win, right? So Achint, you were closer to a lot of the detailed kind of solutioning, right?
Yeah.
What do you think kind of, a couple of things which really worked in this case?
So Abhishek, if I go back to the deal and its nuances, what we can understand is while the pricing it was almost 30% lower, but it was not on the basis of any lower rate cards or any lower input rate being used at all. It was truly a function of, first of all, doing the appropriate solution sizing, which means that the provider who won this deal was right at the cusp of median. They were not way too low, they were not way too high. A way too low can often be construed as an aggressive solution, which can impact, perception, which can impact ability to deliver, and there's a lot of risk associated with that. And then the incumbent and the other peers who were participating, they were clearly solutioning for way above the market, right? At least like 20-30% more in terms of their. The second aspect was the provider who won this deal also was clearly having a very strong automation and analytics story associated with their solution. And as our audience can see, there was a material AMS CCP reduction. I mean, the provider also said AMS for free if they get the entire portfolio, right? Which they didn't, of course. Then there was also very clear articulation of service credit, very clear articulation of innovation funds, innovation teams, value realization team, all of that. There was also a guidelight or a lighthouse team proposed for managing operating models between different organizations. So net, very, very clearly called out, articulate, well-sized solution that was put in place, and that had an impact on the overall commercials and basically helping the client on their business case. So that's what helped them clearly in this case.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay, time for the CTA on the next page. Good segue before we.
And we want to highlight today's offer, complimentary access to a primer on recent market development, accompanied by a conversation with our SMEs. Right? Please use the link for the access, for requesting access to it.
Perfect, and we'll also accompany that, should you want, with a bit of a conversation, right? To talk through some of them.
Yeah.
All right. We have, well, let's move on quickly to the next section where we talk about, have a freewheeling chat. I think we'll try and spend 7 or 8 minutes on these couple of pages. These are mostly going to be our own experiences, right, on some of the pointers before we get into the questions. So with that, we'll talk first about the 4 pitfalls as we go on the next page, which generally enterprises commonly fall into, right? So I know that Achint would want to kick off with one of his pet peeves.
Yeah. And Abhishek, I think when we say enterprises, we want to make it sure for our audience that we are particularly talking about buyers here, right?
Yeah, buyers, correct.
Yeah. And we have seen this pitfall multiple times over years. In fact, this year itself, there have been 3 to 4 instances where we could clearly see that buyer audience, they start with the complex mandate, the SCM and the IT function, they want to run independently. And we, as a firm, we are a strong supporter of that fact, right? That sourcing teams, IT teams should be running these themselves and not getting into a large TP exercise every time. No, but we have noticed a pattern where often buyers bundle too many complex elements in one go and then seek external help very late in the process where they don't have a strong hand on. And what it ends up doing is that it may make the whole process more complex because there are better ways to do things. So those are some of the things, complex mandate can be handled really well. Abhishek, what else in your opinion are the pitfalls that should avoid?
Absolutely. And Achint, another thing related to how to handle complexity, right? So sometimes service providers enterprises or buyers think that an all risk with the service provider model is great. And it often comes at a very high price, right? So, around, for example, service desk, we've seen 2 situations, right, recently where a per user per month model ended up costing the client almost $1 million extra each year per client, right? Because the contact volumes were so low. Right. So the price calculation assumed a very, very high number. So everything, as we realize, is context driven. Just because someone has put in, all the risk is with us, you enjoy. It doesn't really, unless someone really gets into the weeds on what's driving and what's that right amount of risk and the right price that you pay for it, not to take anything for granted. So this is one of the examples which everyone needs to be mindful of, right? Vinamra, there was another similar thing around pricing, where buyers at a later stage said, it was too good to be true, but they found out.
Abhishek. Yeah, in fact, I think we have seen at least 3 recent cases of engagement reviews, which we have done, right? Where the buyer mentioned that while getting into the deal, everything was good to be true on the pricing front, right? But eventually one get what they pay for, right? And some of the assumptions on the additional revenue or the incremental revenue, which the service provider have factored in, but if they don't come true, right? the service quality can go for the toss and it can suffer considerably. And I think the other way to ponder in the pricing situation is the buyers, I think, rather than have a myopic view, need to look at the complete picture. I think we have seen situations where having the competitive fee in the first year and second year could look lucrative, right? But eventually, it can turn out to be the costly affair in the overall deal term. So I think buyers should look at the various elements, what elements are included, what elements are excluded, to understand the overall deal construct over the complete deal term. With that, I think let me ask Prateek to cover the another pitfall to be considered.
Sure, Vinam. I think the other issue that we observe at times is that clients do not proactively communicate what their commercial objectives are from the word go. Right? We have seen situations where suddenly their ask moves from the best possible service to a high degree of financial engineering. Not that this tweaking is not doable, but it's just that it adds to the confusion at times. So there are aspects which should be thought through at the starting itself before it's too late. Abhishek, shall we also talk about some of the pitfalls on the service provider front?
Absolutely, absolutely. And on the next page, we have 5 here. So I'll cover the first one quickly. See, the first pitfall is, and this happens many times where providers make assumptions on certain project spend to cover off a highly competitive managed services scope, right? So a no margin or low margin. So the number of times, buyers have actually mentioned this issue, which they understood causing a lot of poor service because somehow the projects didn't come through or there was an embargo on spend of some sorts. I think, then this becomes a big burden on the part of the service provider because the margins are not coming through, and then the investments and sometimes the extra effort required to give stellar service takes a major hit, right? So, and that really causes dents in the relationship. Achint, I think this point also dovetails with the other two around commercial inflexibility, etc. What do you say, right?
Yeah, sure, Abhishek. Yeah, I mean, commercial inflexibility is not a function of just reducing the price. I'll be clear with that. No buyer would say that reduce the price so much that it can completely kill your margin. There's nothing around that. Commercial inflexibility is a function of how well do you listen to your client, right? I mean, are you making changes to, let's say, for example, your pricing model based on what client is asking for? Are you moving around pieces from one part to the other, which effectively make your overall TCV to be consistent, but then it kind of speaks to solution that the client wants. Right? Commercial inflexibility is pushing back on anything and everything what the client is asking for, right? It can be a function of also that there are opportunities downstream that you can think of, but you need to kind of manage cost, fees better in one piece or the other. And even though on the first part, we did talk about not going to competitive making assumption on the project spend, but commercial inflexibility as an angle is also linked to think of, can it link to SLAs? Those kind of elements, right? I mean, can provider think about, okay, let's talk about SLAs. Can we make that a bit more lenient? Sometimes providers come with a single view that these are the SLAs, this is the price. Both of them remain the same. So those are the things when we talk about commercial inflexibility for providers to look at. Can they make exception to that as a rule?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, and I think I can talk about another simple element which service providers miss on. And that is they often make the generative AI conversation much more about the how rather than the what impact. How the generative AI is going to transform your landscape, what kind of how it's going to improve the productivity and so on and so forth. They are not going to call out the what part, right? What is the impact? A good way that we suggest is to mention the impact of each lever and the dependencies, risks associated with those levers. Talking endlessly about pilots is a thing of 2020, not 2024. Let's hear from Vinam if there is any pending theme on pitfalls.
Yeah, I think one of the other pitfall that service provider usually fall into is leaving all the price sharpening deal sweeteners until the last stage. And I think we have seen that it has costed at sometimes, especially when the buyers are looking for cost savings as a key driver, right? And I think we have seen multiple cases where service providers, they try to share those commercial offer after being deselected, and by the time it is too late. So in fact, in some of the situations, they get eliminated in the initial round. So what we understand is that to build and believe that in order to sustain in the complete deal cycle, they can start using some of these levers smartly right from the initial stages. And that helps them in keeping them in the overall game and position them competitive and increase the chance of securing or winning the deals. I think these are the general pitfalls. I think
Perfect.
we can cover some of the questions that we have received during the today's webinar. Abhishek, shall we cover?
Absolutely. Thanks, Vinamra, Achint, and Prateek. We'll take a few questions and we'll use a mix of ones we received during the session and earlier. I think I'll start with a very interesting one. Achint, we received a question that what are the levers which vendors do to be competitive without compromising quality of work, right? And cover client requirements. So this is often a competing thing. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there are multiple things that one can do. First of all, having a differentiated commercial strategy to things. Having at some point as simple as having different rate card for different kind of services. While it may increase the number of roles or may increase the number of services that one needs to target, but clearly that's one way to kind of have a more nuanced discussion around if X is the kind of survey, these are the kind of pricing that you get, right? So that you can maintain the quality of the work. Then looking at things like alternate delivery locations, if it's possible, to deliver that commodity work from low cost location versus the versus the high touch work to be done from high cost location possibly, so that at least you are able to kind of have the right kind of work in the right location, for example. There can be also others, keep on optimizing your pyramid, keep on pushing for more automation, so that automation and commodity work, so that at least you can control the overall business case for the client to be invested in you as a vendor.
Perfect. Thanks. There was another. There can't be a question. I mean, we cannot not have a, a question answered on Gen AI.
Yeah.
So there was a around, and Prateek, maybe you want to take it. What barriers to incorporating tech and AI in vendor solutions are we seeing in the process, and how are both parties working past those barriers?
Yeah, sure, Abhishek. And I think one of the major barriers that we often hear from enterprises, and we also observe, is the data readiness, right? Most of the enterprises, they are tackling this by addressing their data modernization. They're trying to get their data and platform ready for generative AI. Most of the time, legacy data or data platform, those are proving to be the major barrier with respect to Gen AI adoption. And this is also an area wherein majority of the transformation deals are happening currently.
Yeah. Okay. Vinamra, what about recent trends very quickly on outcome-based pricing models, that are kind of winning deal shaping components?
Yeah. I think Abhishek, definitely we've started seeing adoption of innovative models such as outcome based in some parts where service provider try to position skin in the game, right? And I think in this where the service managed services fee is linked to certain KPIs or outcome. For example, in FinOps services, right? We see gain share model where the fee is linked to the percentage saving that is achieved in the client environment. Other example could be in IT network infra services, right? Where fee could be linked to the certain metrics around the user experience, which is gained through the network uptime or the CSAT scores. So I think, yeah, definitely the trend is upwards. And I think it's an interesting topic. We can have a very separate detailed conversation on it.
Yeah. Okay, there was another one which came through very interesting where are there instances where buyers have gone back to incumbent service providers to ask them to further optimize their pricing? So I'll take this one, and the question was how successful has it been? So short answer, absolutely yes. I think Even in the past, 12 to 18 months, we've seen multiple instances of buyers going back again. A few of the levers which are offered by service providers, and it could be a mix of multiple. One of them is obviously trying to reconsider any barriers which the client may have put on a certain kind of, location usage or offshore usage, right? That could be one. The second could be, around certain degree of, either better visibility into resourcing or overall, I mean, solution structuring, which is a win-win, which allows the service provider to kind of, loosen up their cost structure a bit and then pass it over. One of the most interesting, and it's not a lever, it's more of a commercial behavior, is, especially if it's before a potential rebate or something, is some kind of a significant or material discount offered just to keep the deal sole sourced, right? So of course, it's low risk, there's no risk of transition, etc. And we've actually had service providers say, hey, if you don't take it out to market, we're willing to offer a certain X percentage directly, and then it's for something. And this often is a pretty interesting one, which we've seen clients actually consider well if the discount is good enough, right?
Abhishek, I'd like to add one more thing,
to
the point you have just made. Often we also see that pricing can become a function of perception by buyers, right? And it's a perception that a provider is too high. So providers also, they do what they do is they proactively get themselves benchmarked by using a TPA, right? Or by using a benchmarker, and basically, to get away from that perception that their price high. So that's one of the other ways that I can think of.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question which I'll take before we close out is again, it's interesting because we've recently worked with one of the leading technology industry buyers, right, to help one of their functions move to a solution driven outcome based model. So the question was, what steps do enterprise leaders take to evolve their strategy of transitioning? See, now this answer could take 1 hour in itself, but and the basic components, I think wherever we see people who've done it successfully, right, do a few things very, very well. One is, of course, first study their own kind of service data, volumes, how they're moving, right, what causes it, what's the kind of labor component required, degree of automation possible, a lot of that stuff, right? So that's one, right? The second is then looking at dimensions of the service which can be linked to some kind of outcome and the degree to which an outcome can be managed or influenced by the service provider, right? We've seen a lot of cases where people simply shove it down the throat and say that, hey, this needs to be done, this is the model we're applying, and often that's a recipe for disaster because people do get into it and then they're finding ways to go back into T&M, right? That's not the case. That's right. So the second view is just to figure out which services are amenable, and then the third one is again a lot of coordination with the supplier, understanding what is in it for the supplier as well, right? Just assuming that the supplier would take it at face value and give the best price won't be enough. There has to be a degree of win-win. Can there be a way in which it makes commercial sense for the supplier as well? I think if these three steps are done diligently and transparently, that's where we've seen some of these things being more successful, as opposed to just a mandate from above to move everything to outcome based. Right? So,
yeah.
All right, we are at the top of the hour. Some of the questions which we could not answer, we'll try and get back via email. But before we close out, do check out our blogs for the latest perspectives, and thanks so much for joining. You have a great day ahead and a good week. Thank you.